All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. As people are filing in here, I'm just going to start with some brief housekeeping. We're going to do a quick orientation to the Zoom functionality so you can best navigate the tools on this webinar. And after that, I'll go into some brief introductions to the speakers and the flow of the workshop. So you all are probably zoomed out by now, you know this stuff, but you know, my colleague Megan Fowler and we are your tech supports today. So if you are having any issues with Zoom or anything else, please just send us a private chat and we'll help you as much as we can. You are all coming in on mute today just to keep things a little bit less chaotic, but you will have the opportunity to get off of mute and chat one-on-one with a few other people during the breakout group time a little bit later. If you are so comfortable, we encourage you to have your video on so we can see your lovely faces, but we understand some people may not want to do that. That's fine. The participant button allows you to see who the other participants are on the call with us today for networking purposes. And the chat button, you see that little icon that looks like a thought bubble. If you can go ahead and click that open, the moderators will be sharing links and information with the group in the chat today. And you can also use the chat box to pose any questions or comments that you have throughout the presentation. And we'll do our best to get to everyone's questions during the Q&A section later on at the end of the agenda. And as well, notice in the dropdown, it allows you to chat either to everyone or privately to an individual. The main presentation is being recorded today and we'll be making it available on AFT's website along with a resource handout with resources that will be mentioned by many of the speakers today. And the breakout groups later on will not be recorded. Today we're also going to be running a couple polls to gauge where you all are at and just keep you all on your toes. So we're actually going to start with the first poll now. If you could take a minute, we just want to get a sense of who is here in the room with us. And as you're taking just a few seconds to fill that out, I'll just use that time to just extend a formal welcome to the fourth webinar of the Farms for the Future project, Strategies and Tools for Making Farmland Available to Farmers. My name is Jamie Pottern. I'm the New England Program Manager at American Farmland Trust, and I'll be your MC for the next 90 minutes on this webinar. So, let's share these results here. Hopefully y'all can see that. Interesting mix of folks, it's really great. Got a number of municipal volunteer and staff, land trust volunteer and staff, a bunch of nonprofit folks, nonprofit service providers, and a number of other. So I am curious who the other are. Feel free to identify yourself in the chat, kind of what sector that you feel like you represent. But this really is our intended audience of municipal and land trust folks, as well as the service providers who support farmers throughout Northern New England. So, so great to have you all here with us today. So I'm just going to talk a little bit briefly about the webinar series here. This was created through the partnership and truly incredible organizing efforts of the following people and organizations. My colleague Megan Fowler and myself at AFT, Steph Morningstar from the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, again, who's here on the call with us today, Meg Quinn at Maine Farmland Trust, Jeremy Luigi at Southeast Land Trust of New Hampshire, and Nancy Everhart at the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And Nancy's here with us as well today. This project has been generously funded by Jane's Trust. So we are joined today by some really wonderful guest speakers, some true champions in the field of agriculture and land access in our region. We've got a whole bunch of folks on deck for you today, so I'm just going to rattle off their accolades. Shema Blum-Evitz, who's Land for Goods Program Manager, Steph Morningstar with NEFOC, who's the Executive Director, Pia, who's the Field Agent for Vermont at Land for Good, Sam Smith, Farm Business Director at the Intervale Center, and Maggie Donan, who's the Farmland Access Program Director at Vermont Land Trust. So powerhouse team of folks. And we also have a really wonderful video contribution from a farmer who's actually from Maine, from Swell Farm. We used her video yesterday on the Maine webinar, but it's a really wonderful story and she agreed to share it with you all here today. So just a bit more about the series here. You are sitting in the fourth webinar of this 5-part series of educational workshops that we have designed specifically for land trust municipalities and other nonprofits and service providers in Vermont, as well as the other Northern New England states, those who really want to better understand how to support farms, farmers in their communities. And especially due to the COVID-19 pandemic, as I'm sure you all are aware of, there's just this growing interest in local agriculture and a real genuine desire for more skills and training on the ground for how to secure a more resilient food system at the local level, as well as how to advance greater land justice. So our organizing team has really designed these to each kind of offer some core content, state-specific tools and resources, Q&A, and networking opportunities. And each of these also builds off of the previous one. And so some of you I see have been on for many of these, which were so great to have you back. If you haven't, we've got all the recordings up on the website, and we really do encourage you to go back and catch up on some of the great content that previous presenters have shared over the last few weeks. And so we're going to go over the dates of these upcoming workshops at the end of this presentation. So I'm just going to quickly run through the agenda before I hand you off to our first presenter. You're going to hear first from Steph Morningstar. She'll give an overview of the work of the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust in advancing land sovereignty and land access for Black, Indigenous, and farmers of color in our region. And we just want to say that, you know, we feel very strongly becoming more educated about land justice is really vital to our collective work protecting land. And our planning team and speakers have woven this topic and many farmer voices into the workshops in this series. Shema from Land for Good will then share her extensive knowledge on some high-level tools and considerations for land trusts in towns as you consider the opportunities for making farmland available to farmers. We'll then have a brief breakout session where you'll actually get unmuted and talk to a few other people in a small group about land access efforts that you're doing in your community or that you hope to do. And then we'll come back together to hear about resources and tools specific to land access in Vermont with Maggie, Sam, and Mike, as well as hear some exciting case studies and farmer stories. We'll then have a Q&A at the end with the speakers, and then we're going to wrap up by 3:30 or as close to there as we can. So we have a jam-packed 90 minutes. And so without further ado, we're going to launch a video from Steph Morningstar for some historical and land justice context. So feel free to take it away, Megan. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Stephanie Morningstar. I'm Oneida Turtle Clan, and I'm the Executive Director of the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. I'm here today to share with you a bit about the context and rationale for our work centering BIPOC land access. I'll briefly share with you some of the keystones to what informs our work as a land trust and how we're endeavoring to create land access for BIPOC farmers, earthworkers, and land stewards. Did you know that between 1776 and 1887, the United States seized over 1.5 billion acres from America's indigenous people by treaty and executive order under duress? This map, created by the eHistory Project based on data produced by the Bureau of American Ethnology, mapped every treaty and executive order signed during that period, illustrating the invasion of America. You can see this by watching the blue territories disappear from east to west, replacing them with a tiny fraction of reservation lands where indigenous peoples were forcibly relocated. Those reservations are the tiny red squares you see. As you can see, the gray areas to the east represent the original 13 colonies that were occupied prior to 1776. The Northeast U.S. is encompassed in these territories, most of which are unceded, meaning the land was never legally ceded or treatied. It is truly stolen land. This is a brief timeline of how the land and labor of Black and Brown folks have been stolen through physical and bureaucratic violence. We don't have enough time today to review this timeline in detail, so be sure to register for Webinar 5, Tools and Resources for Supporting Black, Indigenous, and Farmers of Color in Your Community, to get the expanded version. Slavery was a dominant feature of the antebellum South, but did you know that it was also pervasive in pre-Civil War North? The New England states all have a history of slavery. In the early colonial periods, Europeans invaded these lands and enslaved the indigenous peoples who lived there. As New England colonists drove indigenous nations out of their homes, they replaced these enslaved native people with enslaved Africans and invested heavily in the slave trade to power their economy. States such as New Hampshire never even banned slavery. There, slavery only became illegal with the ratification of the 13th Amendment in 1865. I also want to point out the year 1862, a milestone year that shaped agriculture in the U.S. The Homestead Act happened in 1862, and that exploded Western migration by providing settlers 160 acres of indigenous land. It has been named unquestionably the most extensive, radical, redistributive governmental policy in U.S. history. This national land dispossession not only benefited white folks, it continues to do so on exponential levels. It's estimated that about 93 million people, a quarter of the United States population, are inheritors of people who received Homestead Act allotments. Also in 1862, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Morrill Act, which distributed indigenous land, inaccurately named public domain lands, to raise funds for fledgling colleges across the nation, masquerading a massive transfer of wealth as a donation. Finally, in 1862 was the creation of the USDA, which has historically discriminated against Black, Indigenous, and other farmers of color who were pushed off their land by decades of racially biased laws and practices. For example, Black farmers shared stories that USDA officials, especially local loan authorities, spit on them, threw their loan applications in the trash, and illegally denied them loans. This happened for decades, through at least the 1990s. When the USDA's local offices did approve loans to Black farmers, they were often paternalistically supervised, meaning farmers couldn't spend the borrowed money without receiving item-by-item authorization from the USDA, or they received the money late, and in farming we know that timing is everything. Meanwhile, white farmers were receiving unsupervised, on-time loans. Many say egregious discrimination by local loan officials persists today. Any discussion about race in the USDA has to start with the crisis of Black land loss. Although the U.S. government never followed through on its promise of freed slaves of 40 acres and a mule, Black folks were able to establish a foothold in Southern agriculture. Black land ownership peaked in 1910 when 218,000 African American farmers had an ownership stake in 15 million acres of land. By 1992, those numbers had dwindled to 2.3 million acres held by just 18,000 Black farmers. And that wasn't just because farming was a declining way of life. Black folks were being pushed off land in vastly disproportionate numbers. In 1920, 1 out of 7 U.S. farms were run by Black folks, and in 1992, Black folks only ran 1 out of 100 farms. Additionally, this country's legacy built on the theft of land, bodies, and resources of people of color for the benefit of profit and power is crystallized in the challenges Black farmers experience in the food system. For example, in New York State, their $42 billion agricultural and food industry, for example, the disparities between Black farmers and white farmers are best summarized by the existence of only 139 Black farmers among 57,000 farmers in New York. This is complemented by the 2017 USDA statistics depicting a total net cash farm income for Black farmers at minus $906, while for white farmers it was $42,875. These numbers are dramatically similar in all states in the Northeast. These alarming economic disparities and lack of representation of Black farmers are a direct result of intentionally unjust systems and policies dating back 400 years. Farmland ownership is highly consolidated and racialized due to this long history of attempted genocide, dispossession, and slavery. Today, 8% of farms control over 40% of all U.S. farmland. The average farm in America is now over 400 acres compared to 150 acres in 1940, and that number increases every year as smaller farms buckle under the weight of the capital-intensive industrial agricultural model. There's also extreme racial disparity between who labors on land and who profits from it. Over 60% of farm workers are people of color, largely Latinx. Meanwhile, white people own 98% of all farmland, or about 50 times the number of acres owned by people of color. Today's barriers and challenges for farmers of color come in many shapes and sizes, from lack of access to patient capital to unfair, casual, and paternalistic lease agreements. Consider one case of a NEFOC network member farmer who was offered a land access in the form of a casual arrangement. She was twice offered to grow food for her community on land without negotiating a lease, instead by being coerced into handshake deals with white landowners who controlled everything, including when she could access the land, how she farmed, and what she farmed. Both instances devolved into racist stereotypes and assumptions that caused her harm and ultimately forced her to leave. This is a common experience among many NEFOC network farmers and why the NEFOC Land Trust exists today, to connect farmers with permanent, secure, and heritable land tenure. This is where land trust and farmer services organizations come in. We are the gatekeepers to farmland access and the services needed to make a life on land. The Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust is working every day to address these disparities in land access. I ask one question of you as you embark upon this webinar on accessing the strategies and tools for making farmland available to farmers. Who are the farmers of color in your community, and how are you working beside them to ensure this legacy and history of racism and oppression ends with you? Thanks so much for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at connect@nefoclandtrust.org and check out our website for the most recent webinars, tips, and tools at nefoclandtrust.org.
Thanks so much, Steph, for that powerful overview. And if you want to hear more, we really strongly encourage you to attend the next webinar that Steph will be leading. The one for Vermont is on September 23rd, and you're going to get to hear some pretty powerful stories from Black, Indigenous, and farmers of color from throughout the region. As I mentioned, she's also here on the call with us today, and she'll be available for questions during the Q&A coming up in just a bit. But now we're going to run our second poll, and we just want to try to gauge how ready that you feel your town or organization is in making land available to farmers. Just take a few moments and let those results come in. Okay, interesting results here. Y'all are more ready than some of the folks in Maine yesterday. Interesting. So some of you possibly ready, some of you already doing this, many of you wanting to do more, which is great. And for some, maybe not sure or perhaps not applicable. So a nice mix of where folks are at. And so this webinar is for you. And that's a nice segue into our next speaker, Shemariah Blum-Evitz from Land for Good, who's going to help us understand some land access barriers and things for you all to think about when considering making farmland available to farmers in your community. Welcome, Shema.
Thanks, Jamie. Great to be with you all today, and good to see where you're all at in that poll. So some of this might be some basic information for those of you that are already digging in, but hopefully I think there's plenty for all to learn and more to come later in the second half. It's a real timely conversation at Land for Good. We're definitely seeing an increase in aspiring farmers seeking land and landowners that want to make it available. So glad we are together talking about this. Land for Good works on the ground with farmers, landowners, and communities across all 6 New England states. We offer regional programming, advocacy, research, and do some consulting nationally as well. Our work is very focused on farmland access, how farmers get onto land, farmland tenure, how farmers can hold that land, and farmland transfer planning, how farmers can identify and transfer their farm to a successor. So we have a lot of information on our website, and some of those tools we'll be pointing to today. And you should feel free to reach out to our staff for more assistance, as this is, as I said, a brief overview today. We'll move on, Megan, thanks. So what does it take to make farmland available for farming? I'm going to touch on supporting farmland transfer, as I said, and being aware of what new farmers need and considerations for making new land available for farming. Definitely want to point out supporting the business viabilities of farms. And Julia shared this a lot in webinar 1. So if you missed that, you can revisit the recording and glean more there. And lastly, want to note that it really takes a village, and you'll see that in a lot of the case studies shared later on. Farmers need support from a wide array of service providers, professionals, towns, land trust, community members can all come together to make it happen. Why is farmland access a problem? So first, we have a large portion of farmers that are aging out of farming. 2/3 of older farmers in New England shared with us that they don't have identified successors. So they may not have somebody in their family or on their management team that is in a position to take over their farm, or they haven't figured out a plan of how to do so. So this translates to a lot of land nationwide that will be changing hands in the next 2 decades. And in that transition is when the land is most at risk. Could be sold for development, fractured, consolidated with larger farms. A lot of concerns. We'll move on, Megan, thanks. Most farmers want to keep their land in farming, and however, most of their wealth may be tied up in this land as well, requiring them to sell the farmland at highest value in order to retire. And non-farming heirs also may want to see it sold at highest value as well to benefit their inheritance. Many farmers do not expect to retire. Instead, they prefer to stay involved farming as long as they can. We've had farmers tell us they want to die with their boots on in the field or on the tractor. And this can lead to a decline in the farm business if there's not a succession plan in place. And a declining business is harder to sell. It offers less financial return and can be a challenge to rebuild. So at Land for Good, we really encourage farmers to start thinking of a farm transition plan even in their 40s and certainly by the time they're 60. We'd ask you if that's something you're interested in, encouraging farmers that you know as well to consider that. It can take years to plan and implement. Ideally, a 10-year timeline is great to have. So succession planning is complicated. It's time-consuming, can be fraught with family and personal dynamics. It's hard to start the conversation and work out all of the specifics. So for all of these reasons, it's very easy for farmers to ignore and postpone planning and wait for a crisis. And then it can be too late to really be helpful. And balancing this at the same time, access to farmland is the biggest obstacle for new and beginning farmers. So in 2 national surveys, new and young farmers, you can skip ahead, Megan. New and young farmers have identified in 2 national surveys that land access is the largest challenge they see. And conventional methods of purchasing or inheriting are not working now for our communities. I'm going to talk about briefly who are the farm seekers we're seeing. They're a diverse group, not one typology at all. They could be aspiring farmers with or without farming backgrounds. They can be beginning farmers with some experience. And there are established farmers that are looking to expand, that are seeking land as well. They may come from different communities out of the area and need support getting to know the region and markets. They may be seeking land in urban or peri-urban areas to be close to home or to serve special markets and communities. And they can have a wide variety of enterprise and different growing practices. So it's a really diverse group. And some challenges for new farmers to be aware of. As I said, the top challenge has been identified as farmland access, actually finding and getting on land. In addition, New England land values are among the highest in the nation. So purchasing is out of range for most new farmers. And the ability to access financing can be a challenge. And potential debt load can be quite high or insurmountable for them to get off the ground. We're also seeing a mismatch in retiring farmers who may have 100 acres or more to sell, and new and beginning farmers wanting to start off with 5 or 10 acres. So that's something that needs to be overcome. First generation farmers are more in needs of skills, market opportunities, support services and programs to build up their viable business. And also want to note for farmers that are not white, male, heterosexual, there's a lot of safety, prejudice, and discrimination that they can face, and that these are real concerns. We're going to talk a little bit about the land. So a farmer doesn't just need any old piece of land. First, it has to be available. So it has to be something that is not in another use. It has to be accessible. They have to be able to get to it when they need to get to it. And as often as they need to get to it, it needs to be appropriate. So that means having good soils, water, potentially housing and structures. It needs to be close to markets and labor, all of those things. Affordable, that we've touched on. Secure, so they can't have access to land for 1 year and then be able to move all that infrastructure to a new place constantly. So having longer term leases and opportunities for ownership eventually, a longer tenure is much helpful. And findable, so they need to be able to figure out where that land is and have it be advertised. I'm going to touch about property ownership. It's a deeply held value in America and mythology of the American farmer. And however, nearly half of farmers rent some or all the land they farm, and some farmers will never own their farms. Leasing farmland is often recommended to new and beginning farmers as an affordable opportunity to access land and balance that debt load that we talked about. Some farmers end up owning their own home and acreage near that home farm, and leasing a lot of other farms to farmland to fill out their business. And just want to note that landowners come also in a wide variety. There can be private landowners as well as towns, institutions, land trusts, all of the above. So the next slide, Megan, Land for Good has a great new guide we published this past year. It's called the Farm Access Methods. It's a decision guide. You can find it in our website, in our toolbox. And it covers in depth this variety of ownership. So owning land, a variety of farmland tenure options. So including ownership, non-ownership, and also paths to ownership. And it really dives into what are the options and models in each. Next, I'm gonna dive a little bit into some of the specifics about making land trust or town-owned land available for farming and what that process might look like if that's something you want to undertake. So first, you want to start with your goals and why you want to make that land available. It can be for many reasons, to keep it in active use or management, a rural amenity, educational hub, whatever it is, it's good to clarify that so that you and everybody involved are aware, and whoever you're recruiting is also aware of what the goal is. Next, you want to think about the vision. What does it really look like? What is that ideal farm? How involved is the landowner on the property? Thinking through what's restricted, what's permitted, all of those visioning questions. That'll be very helpful. You'll want to understand your land, so what the production potential is and the natural features and infrastructure that you're offering on that land. This will require a bit of research, and there's groups out there that can help you with that. Just for starting with your soil type, the UC Davis and Webb soil surveys are useful tools. And there's also a Vermont Natural Resource Atlas, which is a great Vermont specific tool to help you. Having maps, even Google Maps, is very helpful to outline what the property is and what's included. Next, we're gonna touch about types of farms. So when you envision that ideal farm, what enterprise is it? There's a lot of different enterprises, and they all come with their own smells and noises and seasonalities. And those are all things to be aware of, and when you're envisioning what it's going to look like. When you're ready to reach out and find a farmer, you're going to want to do a little bit of research of where to, if there are farmers that are interested, and also clarifying your goals and objectives when you make an offer, to clarify what it is you're actually offering and describe that. You can post those on the Vermont Land Link. It's a great resource in Vermont. And their seekers, for people who are looking for land, can also post what they're looking for. So that's somewhere where you can glean what seekers are looking. And you can also post what the property you're offering is. The Vermont Land Link also feeds into New England Farmland Finder. So you'd be able to have a broader reach. New England Farmland Finder is something that we find farm seekers from all over the country utilize to look at all the 6 New England states to find out what land is available. You'll want to think through what kind of criteria or qualifications you're looking for. Is there going to be an application process, an interview process? Are you putting out a bid? So those are all steps that you'll need to think through and figure out how you're going to do the screening and pick a final candidate. Next slide is about communication, and communication will definitely be key. You're going to want to set up a plan for clear and open ongoing communication for the whole process in finding a farmer, as well as once the farmer is there, that communication is going to be key for a long-going successful relationship. The next slide talks about this cartoon says, "Sorry, I don't shake. I get everything in writing." So this is to stress the importance of getting a written lease. In some cases, you might want to do a license. So if you have questions about that, you can ask later. And writing it down is really important to make sure everyone is on the same page. If there's a change in management on either side of the equation, that everybody's clear. So that can take some time, but is a really important building block. Okay, now I want to touch on how okay. I've got 2 minutes left, but I think we're there. So beyond making parcels of land available, there's many other things you can do, and I'm just going to touch on them now. You can raise awareness of the issue, really help ID local issues in your community on farmland access and transfer, integrate farming and farmland into local planning and zoning. You could establish an agricultural commission, in Vermont, I understand agricultural commissions aren't available, but there are some towns doing things like an agricultural advisory committee. Advocating for timely farm transfer planning and hosting mixers, getting landowners and seekers together. So there's a variety of things that you can take on depending on what fits you. How to get started? You'll want to talk about it with peers, town government, your community. You can start by assessing what lands you have available, hosting educational events, which we could assist with if you're interested, distributing and referring people to resources that are available. And who to involve. I will end there with, there's a lot of people to get involved in the process, and it really does take a village. So you want to reach out and figure out who in your community needs to be there. Thanks. Back to you, Jamie.
Thank you so much, Shema. I always learn so much every single time that I hear you talk. So thanks so much again for providing that overview. We're going to kind of shift a little bit now for those of you who've been on some of the last few webinars. This will be familiar. We're going to go into some breakout groups, and this is just an opportunity to kind of have some human interaction face to face. The way it's going to work if you haven't been in one of these is Megan's going to hit a button and you're going to be magically transported into a new Zoom room with probably 4 other people. Your facilitator will identify themselves, and you're just going to go through a short exercise of, sharing what your town or organization has done to help make land available to farmers, and or what you're hoping to do. So just a quick opportunity to share something you're working on, get a little bit of feedback, to meet some other humans. And then you're going to get sucked back into this main space, and we're going to continue on with the state-specific speakers. So please do not leave during the breakout. Some people, if you have to go, we understand, but please do come back because there's a ton of great content after this, and as well as the Q&A after this. So without further ado, Megan, please end us off, and we'll see you back here in a few minutes, y'all. I hate getting sucked away from these great conversations. Well, welcome back, folks. I hope you had some riveting and exciting and enlivening conversations. Our group was pretty stellar. Lots of fabulous support organizations. Many of us just doing lots of great work on the ground, helping farmers. So it was great to be in that space. So we unfortunately don't have time for a report back as we've done in some of the other groups, but if you're feeling called to share anything that came up in your group that you want to share with the full group here in the chat, whether like something that what your next step might be or some cool connection that you made, feel free just to share that with us in the chat. But we are going to move on because we have a lot of incredible content to get to, and some of the folks you've been waiting for here. So I'm going to just hand it off to Sam Smith and Maggie Donan. They're going to share some state-specific resources and tools for land access in Vermont. So take it away, you two.
Well, I'm Sam Smith. I'm the Farm Business Director at the Intervale Center in Burlington, Vermont, and I provide business planning services statewide, primarily in the form of transfer planning services at this point. But we have a couple other business planners who are also on this call who are focused more on land access and beginning farmer services. So we do a lot of work with a real diverse array of farms all around the state. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about the Norris berry farm. And so this was a farm project, and Maggie's going to go more into the details of the Farmland Access Program and sort of what that is and how it's shifted over the years. But I'm just going to talk about this case study of a couple young farmers that I worked with who went through the Farmland Access Program and purchased a farm, and just give a sense of what the deal looked like and what their challenges were and what their successes were. So this RFP, I think, was put out in 2016, late 2016. And so the farm in question was the Norris Berry Farm in Moncton, Vermont, and it was run by this woman, Norris, who ran it for about 30 years in different iterations. And it primarily ended up in the end of her tenure being focused on berry and vegetable production. It was a conventional farm. She relied on H2A labor, and pick your own strawberries were sort of what they became known for, but she was doing about 300,000 in gross sales through a variety of different market channels. So wholesale to institutions, wholesale to retail grocery stores, and then she had a on-site farm stand, and then obviously the pick your own berries. Next slide. So the property itself, as you can see, this is a very flat picture, but it's actually a very sloping property. So you can see the farm in the foreground, and the property runs down from there. And the majority of the fields and high quality tillable land are actually on relatively sloping ground. It's about 108 acres with 94 acres of tillable land. And there were about, I want to say 20 acres of land in active vegetable and fruit production, and then the rest was being hayed by a large dairy down the road. So the RFP process, that's the request for proposal from the land trust. They went through and worked with Norma. She was really ready to retire and had a really quick timeline. She wanted to get her RV packed and head to Florida basically before the snow was flying. And she actually had subdivision plans drawn up for this property and was basically ready to sell it when the land trust stepped in. And they purchased the property pre-conservation, and then the transaction for the actual sale of the property to the farmers happened with the transaction around the conservation easement. Just to give you rough numbers on this, the pre-conservation value was $825,000. The easement was roughly $420,000, and then there were about $85,000 in sort of associated costs that were third-party costs. There were some infrastructure improvements I think that needed to happen on this farm. And then there's obviously transaction costs and then conservation and stewardship costs rolled into the conservation deal. The funding on this one is a little bit interesting, and I think this is something that we're going to see more and more, hopefully, around the state. Obviously, the largest chunk of funding came through VHCB, which is pretty typical for these conservation easements with farms that do have significant agricultural significance in the state. The rest of the funding, so $60,000 came from the town of Moncton itself. They have a conservation fund, and they felt like this was a priority project for them. Partially, I think, because it was an established agricultural business that had a track record in town and was also sort of a community resource. And then 40K came from private foundations. And I think that this is relatively common in terms of these conservation projects, that there's a chunk of conservation dollars that can come from VHCB, but oftentimes there's an additional need for funding on top of that to make the actual conservation process happen. This farm does have an option to purchase at agricultural value easement on it. So, the eventual purchase price was $405,000, which is, it's relatively accessible. And, this house actually has a main farmhouse and then a secondary housing unit that could provide rental income. And in this case, seasonally has housed H-2A workers. So let's go to the next slide. So it was purchased by Stephen and Sarah Park, and we actually, if you go to the next slide, we'll get a good picture of them. It's better than, and they were referred to me by the land trust, and then I did some business planning work with them. They're very competent business managers. They were really engaged in the business planning process, and we were able to provide them with really targeted TA around marketing and business development. So they've been managing this business for about 3 years right now. They came into it, they had equity and they had a farming background. They didn't have a really significant amount of equity, but it was enough to get them through the purchase process and get them into the startup year. They really struggled around being able to cash flow this business, and luckily they found a loan officer who was open to working with them and understood the sort of more alternative business model, which is something that we sometimes see as a challenge. So they've continued to struggle a little bit with this. I think overall, though, they had a lot of support from the VLT and farm viability, and they were able to grow their management really, really quickly. They've shifted, even this year, they shifted really quickly in regards to COVID, and they have done a great job of maintaining their business model. I think they're going to actually be about where they thought they were going to be in terms of their projections this year. So, and then the other things, so the challenges or lessons learned from this one, this was a really early farmland access project in terms of the structure of a buy, lease, sell, which hopefully Maggie will talk about. And it only had a 12-month lease term, 12 to 14-month lease term, which they would have definitely benefited from a 3-year lease term. And yeah, the access to capital is always a challenge with businesses like this. So I'm going to stop there and Maggie can take over.
Thanks, Sam. So that covered a lot around sort of an example of the way in which the Farmland Access Program works. And I'm going to talk a little bit more broadly and then also talk about some of our community work. So, you know, VLT's mission broadly is that current and future generations are deeply connected to the land and benefit from its deliberate protection and its responsible stewardship. And I work within, you know, one segment of our work, which is the Farmland Access Program. And our goal is to connect farmers with affordable land. So we do this through new conservation acquisition. We do this through connecting farm seekers with conserved land that's already in our portfolio that we're already stewarding. And then we also do this sometimes through interim acquisition, where we step in and become the owner, like Sam spoke about with the farmland, or with the Norris Berry Farm or Full Belly Farm example. We actually purchased that farm and owned it for a little while. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide, but we work with first-time farm buyers who have farm experience and a business plan and are getting support in that business plan. We work with farmers who are looking to expand. We also work with farmers who are transitioning out of farming and looking to get some support in thinking about their succession plan, the future of their operation, whether that's within their family or working with somebody who's, you know, outside of their family, whether it's an employee or somebody who they find through some sort of process. So we work with a diverse array of operations, and it's really important for us to think about the this wraparound support. So I work really closely with Sam and with others on this call from the viability program around making sure that you know, that piece that Shema talked about, or about the importance of the viability of the farm on the land. We try to connect farmers with resources so that they're getting that support as well. And you can go to the next slide, Megan. So the Farmland Futures Fund is new for VLT. We've been purchasing properties for a long time, I think, but this sort of decision to grow that part of our work, to give it this kind of snazzy name, you know, we really feel like that's kind of what Vermont needs from us today, what the Vermont agricultural and conservation community needs from us today. So our goal is to facilitate 200 farm transfers between 2020 and 2030. Those would not all be by utilizing this fund, but that we would somehow be involved in facilitating those transfers. You know, mainly based on a lot of the statistics that Shema noted in her introduction here around just the immense amount of farmland transition that is taking place and about to take place. So the way the fund will work is, you know, our goal is to purchase farm properties as needed to facilitate transfers and also help to strengthen and diversify our ag economy. We have a goal around implementing water quality improvements and other ecological restoration when appropriate, and to support rural communities that rely on agriculture as part of their economic and cultural landscape. And, you know, we really are focused on giving higher priority to projects with that have increased diversification or are involved in innovative farm operation, projects that will help or improve or increase the viability of an existing farm operation, projects that have a next generation of farm ownership element to them. And I can kind of go on and on about the, you know, we have a specific set of goals. But I think the reason why it was so helpful to have Sam kind of lay out that example was a lot of the impetus for this fund came from lessons and learning done with partners around this transition period and how challenging that can be and how highly capitalized you need to be to start a farm business. And so the goal around this fund is to really give farmers a longer pathway to ownership when it makes sense. And so we have a decision-making process around, is this a project where it makes sense for a farm purchase to happen right away? Is it a project where they're really going to benefit from this longer pathway to ownership, where really the only costs they need to cover are taxes and insurance of the property? And so we work closely again with their providers and their business planners to think about what's going to be the best kind of setup for them. You can go to the next slide. So that was kind of a quick overview. I'm happy to talk to folks about the Farmland Futures Fund more offline or at another time, but I wanted to also talk a little bit about some other work that VLT does with the Pine Island Community Farm. So as an organization, VLT, we own 4 farm properties throughout the state, which really serve as our centers for land-based engagement and community investment. And it's part of our strategy to really deepen our ties in communities, to stay longer within farm projects, and to help deliver broader outcomes. So this is an example of a property that we own. We don't have a plan to transition it. And so it fits into kind of a different bucket of our work. So in 2012, VLT purchased this farm property. It's in Colchester, Vermont. It's 230 acres. I think we identified it as an opportunity. It was up for auction, and it was such a large farm, so close to the largest population center in Vermont, that we wanted to kind of take advantage of that and jump on that opportunity. There was also a lot of great ecological restoration potential along the Winooski River. So this project was created to serve the community and protect the Winooski River. You can go to the next slide. And so around the time that VLT purchased this farm, there was a community organizer who suggested this idea around starting a goat meat business, because fresh goat was really hard to find in Vermont. And so we launched these few businesses on the farm. So we have Chuda, who's up here in the bottom left, produces 400 meat goats a year and also sells compost. Teogen is there. He raises about 3,000 meat birds a year. And we enrolled these projects in the Farm Viability Program. And through that program, we were really able to get support around raising some money, seeking some financing for some infrastructure investments that these farms needed. So we raised $320,000 in 2017 for a new goat barn, a grain bin, and some various other things. You can go to the next slide. So the other element, in addition to the farm businesses that exist at Pine Island, are the community gardens and just kind of the general community programming that happens there. So there's 7 acres of community gardens, 60 families from 10 countries. The gardens are organized by language and nationality. There's garden leaders within the community who plan and address issues. And then there's community events that happen every year, like a Christmas tree recycling. So you can bring your Christmas tree there and the goats will eat the tree, and also a family harvest festival in September. So I'm at my time. That was really hard to fit in, I'll just say, but.
Sorry, Maggie.
That's okay.
You did it, you nailed it. Thank you so much. I hate to rush you guys because you have so much great knowledge and such great stories, and we tried to cram in a little bit too much. So we are actually gonna skip, we had a video feed up from Swell Farm in Maine. We are going to skip just due to time, because we want to make sure to get to Mike Gia from Land for Good. So if you do want to catch that video, we did show it yesterday in the Maine one, and that recording will be on our website. But we're going to hand it off to Mike Gia. Take it away, Mike.
Hi, and I'm the Vermont field agent for Land for Good, so I'm the main contact here. And one of the things that we offer at Land for Good that hasn't specifically been mentioned yet is that we do one-on-one consultations with farm seekers, with farm landowners, and families that are considering farm succession or farm transfer. And we offer at least the initial consultations free of charge, and then in many cases we're able to use other funding if we need to spend time with other people. And in particular, we are one of the contractors to the Farm Viability Program, which gives us the opportunity to work with farmers long-term on farm succession and transfer. So what I wanted to do is cover over the next few minutes was to take a little bit of what Shema introduced and kind of bring it down to some of the things that I see here on the Vermont level, and how it's working and how we might be able to better improve it. We're lucky here in Vermont that we have a really great amount of land access tools and resources and people. And I've been working on this on land access issues since the late 90s, and it's been really impressive to see how Vermont has led the way, including the cliche we use is to adding more tools to the toolbox. But none of that's useful if people don't know that there is a toolbox, that there is resources and people are out there, or who they are and how to connect to them. So for all the outreach that we can do as organizationally, as the Vermont Land Link program tries to do, it's hard to reach everyone, and particularly every property owner that might be out there and have land that's available. And I think that in particular, that is an area where municipalities and the local groups are already playing a strong role and can play even more of a role in terms of being able to get people to those resources, either just by making people aware of them or by having that direct outreach, because in some cases they may be hesitant to reach out to those resources. We love conservation easements, but some people are very afraid of them, or just dislike them, or want to look for other tools. So they may not reach out to the land trust, at least initially. Sometimes people warm up to it over time. And sometimes they're not ready quite yet to post out there that they have a property available until they really have under their feet what they how they want to go about it. And so talking to somebody ahead of time is helpful, but knowing who that is can be difficult. And that's where people on the ground locally can sometimes, particularly if they're neighbors and have personal connections, can be really the conduit to helping them get connected to the resources that are out there. And it's not always just about thinking about altruistically, oh, you should make sure this farmland is available because people have other interests. And so knowing what those interests are and seeing, can those needs be met? Can those interests be met? In addition to the broader issues around farmland access. So there's issues around retirement funding, about family legacy and so forth that also can't be ignored just because we would like the idea of the farm staying and farming and the farmland being accessible. So on the municipal level or on a community organizational level, making good, starting those conversations can be really, really critical, as well as making good referrals. So we go to the next slide. As we talked about, farm succession is a big issue because of the age of the farming population, and that's often when farms are the most vulnerable. As we brought up, many farmers don't have successors, and they may think that there's none out there. And we think that, again, that they must be aware that there's young farmers out there looking. They might be aware of Vermont Land Link, but I think we take that for granted sometimes too much, and need to be able to start those conversations to let them know that there are people out there and that there is potential opportunities out there. Again, the Farm Viability Program, a lot of, that program is starting to get more and more prominence, but there's still many people out there that are not aware that that program is out there to help with farm succession issues specifically, as well as the farm business planning. About a third of all farmland nationally and in Vermont is not owned by farmers. And I think that's an area in particular where we're not reaching. We reach farm, in that first slide, I emphasized contacting farm landowners. Obviously, we also want to contact farm seekers in the communities as well. We want to make sure they're aware of the resources. But very often they're going after them and trying to tap those. Now, again, we can't take that for granted either, but particularly with non-farming landowners, people who don't have that connection, that own a third of the land, they're not connected to any of the resources, including thinking about succession. And so we'll see farmers that maybe rent half of their land base, particularly dairy farmers, I'll see this very often, and they might rent it from 10, 15, even 20 different landowners. And the issues come up is, we're working on farmland succession with those farmers for them and their farm, but they're relying on a land base that belongs to non-farming landowners who aren't necessarily thinking about succession either, who aren't as readily connected to the agricultural resources that we have in the state. And so people on that municipal level or community organization level can really be helpful if you can be reaching out to those people and helping to educate them. Next slide. Some of these tools or approaches that we've talked about, I wanted to highlight a couple of them. Sometimes communities can take a community-wide perspective and have a study committee or forums that discuss about agriculture in their community. There's going to be a video we don't have time to show today about how East Montpelier went about this about 20 years ago. It led to a municipal taxpayer-funded conservation fund that has helped in farmland conservation, but it also just helped more about property owners thinking about their farm within the broader context of the community. Conservation commissions would be a great place for these kind of discussions to happen. I know in the community of Guilford, they were looking and saying, do we set up an agricultural advisory committee like Brattleboro has, which I'll talk about in a minute. And they ultimately decided, we want to have a broader group looking at broader environmental issues, help keep the energy up long-term. And so they said, we're going to found a conservation commission that's also going to look at how do we keep agriculture in the town of Guilford. Hosting workshops for landowners and also farm seekers on leasing. We have done, Land for Good, we've done these and they've been very well attended in Rutland, South Burlington, Waitsfield, Montpelier, West Lebanon, New Hampshire, which brought in a bunch of people from the Vermont side of the river, and we're open to doing more. The mixers that Shema mentioned, we haven't done those in Vermont. We've had some success in New Hampshire of having property owner farmer mixers. I think, the Intervale, I think, has been trying to do some mixers as well through the Land Link program. Again, making good referrals, getting resources on your websites, maybe a conservation commission page or so forth. Next slide. Brattleboro.
Mike, so you get to do one quick case study and then I got to cut you off, unfortunately.
Yep. So Brattleboro has the only town that I'm aware of that has an agricultural advisory committee. They originally set it up in the 1980s. If you can look at this slide, they're just now starting to think about how do we reinvigorate that committee to look at things about more resilient food system, which obviously could address land access. And if we go to the next slide, one of the things, early on, the commission did a lot with tax stabilization for farmers in the community, but they really played a critical role when the 600-acre Brattleboro Retreat Farm was coming up for sale because the town of, or because the Brattleboro Retreat needed the income. It really was that local committee that was ready to go on the ground that managed to be the organizing force that pulled together the Wyndham Foundation, the Vermont Land Trust, and a whole lot of local people towards conserving that farm. And that farm now is being used by 4 different operations, including three local farmers, including one local startup farm couple. Wild Carrot Farm is now using a small portion of that land. And I think that farm very easily could have been lost if there was not already a local group on the ground that was ready to go when something like this happened.
All right, Mike, I hate to cut you off, but we have to wrap. But and Land for Good has the most incredible staff and they've got some great case studies. We can't unfortunately get to the next one because I do want to make sure y'all get time to answer these great questions that are coming in. So So the first question actually is for Steph Morningstar. Steph, if you can pop back on. This question is, how can land trusts and towns best partner with the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust?
Hi, yeah, so Jamie is going to add a link into the chat. The first one is the survey that I have to send that to you still, Jamie, but I'll email that to you as soon as I can. We're doing a survey across the Northeast of BIPOC farmers. It would be great if you have any BIPOC farmers in your region, to reach out to them, to have them complete the survey. We have about 400 NEFOC network members, but we know that there are many other BIPOC farmers all across the Northeast. So that would be very, very helpful. Additionally, we have a lot of outreach happening right now. There's a lot of organizations getting in touch with us, especially since the murder of George Floyd, because folks are starting to realize that they are needing to connect with BIPOC communities and support BIPOC communities in certain ways. We don't have the capacity to help with things like equity, diversity, and inclusion training. But what I can say is that we are open to building relationships with folks. So starting off from that place of, if you're looking to partner with NEFOC, we want to know you first. So we want to know who you are. We want to make sure that you've taken anti-oppression training and that you're embodying those trainings in your organizations in actionable ways. So some of those ways are listed in the on the next link that Jamie will put in the chat, which is the Soulfire Farm Take Action page. And that has a ton of resources for you, all the different steps around different types of food sovereignty action steps, as well as COVID-19 policy demands. So be sure to check that out. But organizationally, we are looking to uplift land access for Black, Indigenous, POC farmers and land stewards across the Northeast. So if you have ideas, if you have programming right now that would be, responsive to something like that, please start reaching out, build a relationship. Our schedules are crazy busy. We're starting to probably take new meetings later on in the year, maybe November, with new partners at this point. But the first thing would be just to check out this page, see where you're at, and if you want to have a connection, you can email us at connect@nefoclandtrust.org. Thanks. Thanks
so much, Steph. And we have pasted those links in the chat, so we're all good there. I hope you all will open those. The next question is from Gianna, and it's how do partners address the mismatch between retiring and new farmers in terms of acres needed and sale price? Great question. I don't know, Shema or Mike, if you want to take a first stab, and then anyone else on our team is welcome to chime in.
Yeah, I think Mike and others are probably better suited.
Okay, so, you want to go first, Mike? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I think, one of the things that's getting a lot more attention recently is about cooperative ownership models of land. That's been present here in Vermont for quite a while, and we have a few examples, including Wellspring Land Cooperative up in Marshfield. On our website, we have a story explaining how that works. But one of the things that came up in the breakout group was the new Agrarian Commons that is getting set up here in Vermont in South Burlington. And the Agrarian Commons is a program of the Agrarian Trust, which is working on these projects throughout the country, on multiple farm participants, multiple farmers on larger pieces of land. And in some cases, people are also just looking together on their own with other people who are looking at purchasing farmland. And one of the early projects the Vermont Land Trust did was a project down in Starksboro, where the largest chunk of land was divided out to a beef farmer. The best tillable went to a vegetable farmer, and then the municipality of Starksboro actually got a small piece for ball fields.
Interesting. That's great. So the next question we have, maybe Sam or Maggie, you want to take a stab at this? It's from Jill. And the question is, how can community-based groups help garner support for initiatives for farmland protection and access? Generally, it seems this task has fallen to land trust staff. It seems there should be ways to link with other land-based organizations.
I think that, We're lucky in that some of the communities in the state do have really active either agricultural committees, or they've identified groups within the community that are really interested in preserving and making accessible agricultural land. I think that there is definitely a need out there to try and have more outreach around the resources that are available to farmers and also landowners. And then I think bringing in organizations like the Land Trust or the Intervale Center to do some of the initial work around just helping people identify resources and chart the potential path if there's going to be, like, especially in the case of a collaborative farm project like Mike was talking about, trying to figure out what is the critical path that's going to make that a successful project. So I think just trying to get, a lot of us are really good at sort of assessing the information and then identifying the resources and making really great referrals if we're not the right person to talk to. So Maggie and I are always open to fielding questions and then pointing people in the right direction if that is needed.
Great.
And I'll add Land for Good is also available and could potentially facilitate community-wide discussions or forums depending on the situation.
Yep. So I think we have time for maybe just one more question. I'm not sure who's the best person to answer it, so I'll let you duke it out here. But the question's from John. For far too many farmers, the farm is their retirement fund. Therefore, they're leery of selling for anything less than as much as possible. Do any of you think a retirement program might be a better way to ease this anxiety? Yeah, Mike, and maybe I thought Nancy could also take a stab at this.
You know, this is something that actually was discussed back in the 90s in one of the statewide reports on agriculture. I think one of the things that you know, is difficult is figuring out how to fund that, or where the capital comes from. But it is something I've been giving a lot of thought of, particularly just getting the farmers I've worked with in succession planning that were able and chose to prioritize saving for retirement outside of their real estate much earlier on, have much smoother transitions for it. If the farm is financially successful and makes it a priority, it is a possibility. But if we could have cost incentives, like there are employer matches, if we could set something up like that for agriculture, I think it could be a benefit where it's not necessarily just the farmer or just the public, but maybe a hybrid system.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Nancy, you want to add anything? Yeah.
Well, I think there was at least a pilot, probably a federal program that was, the goal was to do exactly that, to be able to match funds that farmers put in. It's a great question, John, and obviously it's also related just to the basic viability question, right? I mean, farmers that have a more viable business and can afford to do that. And I think gets back to your point, Mike, about planning and planning early. And, you know, because if you start thinking about this when you're in your 60s, you know, it's too late. But if you can start saving a little bit every year, you know, in your 30s and 40s, it makes such a huge difference. So I think it kind of speaks to, you know, all the work that all these partners, you all are doing, and just sort of helping farmers understand how important it is, which is hard to do in the context of, you know, a crushing workload and everything else. So it's a great question.
Great. And so we do have to move on. I do just want to note Mariah's question, which I personally just like, and maybe I'll try to answer it, which is succession planning information widely shared or available at town offices? And I think the answer to that is probably no. So maybe Vermont is much ahead of the curve, but I encourage you all to sort of renegade, like bring some Land for Good booklets and materials and resources, like bring them to the town hall, like get them up on your town website under community resources. I think that's a really powerful role for local advocates in the town, is to help disseminate information at that hyper local level. So hopefully you all go out and kind of guerrilla garden with some succession planning information after this part. But we do have to start our wrap up. I know we're at time. If you can all just stick on for 2 more minutes, we just want to let you know about some upcoming workshops. So as we've mentioned a few times on this call, the 5th and final webinar in our Farms for the Future series is happening on September 23rd. Jeff Morningstar, who you heard from today, will be leading that. tools and resources for supporting Black, Indigenous, and farmers of color in your community. There is no cap on that workshop, so we really want to try to get as many of you and your colleagues and associates to come onto that. It's going to be a really powerful workshop. We also just want to give a plug to Land for Good and Maine Farmland Trust have their annual Farmland Access and Transfer Conference happening virtually November 16th to 18th, and they'll be posting some further details soon. So please stay tuned for that great conference coming up. And then we just want to say very special thanks to our incredible presenters today. I won't rattle off all of your names again because there's so many of you wonderful folk, but thank you so much for sharing your time and wisdom with us. It was just so incredible, and I hope that everybody on the call expresses that same gratitude to you, and feel free to reach out to any of these folks. For those of you on the call, I'm sure they're very happy to follow up with you or answer any questions that you have. One quick plug is for you to please fill out this survey, which I'm pasting here in the chat. If you could pop that open in your browser and just fill it out right after you sign off of here. Otherwise, we will be sending it around in our follow-up email within the next day or two. But we would just love your feedback on this webinar today, as well as if there's any resources or anything we can follow up with you about. It's a great way for us to do that. So please do take the time to do that. We would really appreciate it. And so lastly, just to say thank you again for being here with us today. Please feel free to follow up with me with any questions that you have. And again, we really hope to see you in a couple weeks at the last and final workshop of this series. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your day. And thanks so much for being here with us. Be well.
Thanks, Jamie.